Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Starbase Flyover Update. This is episode 11 and we'll be doing a flyover at Starbase, Texas. Hope you enjoy this flight. Consider supporting us on Patreon to gain early access to the flyover gallery the same day they are taken, and the support helps out tremendously with paying for the expenses associated with the flyover. Thank you so much and enjoy the video. We'll begin this week's tour of Starbase with a look at the Massey's testing site, which is being used as a testing and structural verification site for ships, boosters, and the Hotstaging test article. For a quick overview, here's a map layout of Massey's site. Comparing the first flyover taken last week on Wednesday, July 26. Now sliding over to a second photo of Massey's taken on Monday, July 31st. You can scrub back and forth through the images to see more of the differences between these photos by using the arrow key. Now let's bank left to this gorgeous shot of Massey's test site, nestled along the Rio Grande River. Zooming in, we see our first point of focus for today, the booster cryogenic testing station. The pad previously home to booster 10 before its rollback seems to be ready to host the booster puckshucker. We can see the booster puckshucker under construction, slightly to the left, which has since started to receive its hydraulic thrust ramps. These vertical black pieces that were currently being installed at the time of the flyover will be responsible for pushing against the thrust puck of the boosters, simulating the force of the booster's 13-center Raptor engines. Additional thrust ramps can be seen staged over here. Further to the left sits Ship 28 on its own puckshucker. It underwent cryogenic testing on the 28th of July, where it was filled with liquid nitrogen and liquid oxygen, also known as LN2 and LOX. This verified the ship's ability to hold cryogenic liquids under pressure. Moving down and to the left, we arrive at the construction site for the new unknown building. This week we spotted rebar in the previously dug square holes. We can expect to see concrete poured to create the foundations for this new building in the following week or two. Next up, we see the structural testing cage. On Sunday the 30th of July, several Hotstaging test components rolled out from the build site to Massey's. These include the old forward dome of Booster 11, otherwise labeled by SpaceX as the hot stage load head. On top of it sat the Hotstaging ring, and the stack was followed by the bottom skirt of S26.1. Now let's look at this render courtesy of the space engineer, where we can see the new design of the Hotstaging ring attached to the old forward dome of Booster 11. The Hotstaging ring was removed and reinstalled on the load head while the duo were at Massey's on July 31st. The bottom or aft ring of S26.1 will be fitted on top of it before testing on the can crusher. Let's explore each component of this test article. Switching to this aerial angle, we got lucky with this flyover as we caught the Hotstaging ring in the middle being lifted onto Booster 11's load head, as mentioned earlier. But that's not the only thing we noticed. Indeed, after zooming in, we realized that the top of Booster 11's load head has a hole in it. Where is it? Your guess is as good as mine, although it is pretty good sign that this test article will not be flying. It has yet to be seen whether this new Hotstaging ring design will be able to survive the crushing loads between the thrust of 33 Raptor engines on booster underneath it and the massive Starship on top of it. We can expect them to be structurally tested in the can crusher to simulate vertical thrust loads during flight. To the right of this whole contraption sits the aft skirt of S26.1. We notice that this ring has more vertical structural support running along the ring, more than we would expect for a shipped aft skirt. So why is this? It's likely that the bottom ring of test article S26.1 will be used to simulate a ship being attached to a Hotstaging ring, so it's also possible that the ring is stringered so heavily to account for above average flight loads during testing of the Hotstaging ring. After all, we don't want the ship ring to get crushed before the Hotstaging ring is. The old forward dome for Booster 11 is also heavily stringered for the same reason, as the only thing that we want to see tested to failure is the Hotstaging ring, nothing else. So that's the in detail explanation of the Hotstaging test article. Next, let's move up to the can crusher. This week we noticed a horizontal piston load bar for testing the pull down pistons has been removed, ahead of the can crusher being placed on top of it, which has since occurred. Now moving to the tank farm. Here we see that formwork has been removed, revealing the foundations for brand new horizontal storage tanks. Next, we move on to the right of the burst pad, which we haven't touched on in quite a while, and neither has SpaceX. But this week we saw that the pad has been cleared of dirt after it was used a couple of months ago for flight termination system testing on test article B6. This wraps up our tour of Massey's. On to Sanchez. Next up is Sanchez, comparing the first flyover taken last week on Wednesday, July 26. Now sliding over to the second photo taken on Monday, July 31st. Starting over on the west side of Sanchez, where the ground fabrication building is being re-erected, there has been some minor progress since the last flyover. On the lower end of the image, we can see the garage door for the main structure, famously referred to as a pizza oven, has been installed. On the right side of the building, steel is being erected for the other lean-to. Shifting over to the prefabrication area for Mega Bay 2 sections, we can see one of the sections that was present last week has since been transported to the ring yard prior to installation. This was the third section for Level 5. What remains is the fourth and final section for Level 5 nearing completion prior to transport. Fabrication for Level 6, including the roof, is likely to take place on a piece-by-piece basis atop the structure if it's destined to match the current Mega Bay design. Just below the Mega Bay 2 prefabrication area, there appears to have been little progress made on the new ring structures. Most notably, the structure at the top has been covered in a fresh coat of white paint. The 20 pieces of steel arranged in the ring at the bottom of the image appear to be unchanged. It remains unclear what both of these structures will be for. Could they be new stands destined for the Star Factory or Mega Bay 2? Let us know in the comment section below. Moving up to the Rocket Garden, we can see that Ship 15 has met its untimely demise. A little over 2 years since the first successful suborbital flight and landing of a Starship, all that remains on the stand of the first Starship to successfully belly flop is the aft section. The rest of the ship has joined pieces of S-27 over in the scrapyard. You know what they say, all legends must die. One interesting thing to note is the common dome of FSN-15 had not met the same fate as that of S-27, which leads us to believe that SpaceX scrapped the ship to simply free up some storage space. Ship 26 has since been relocated from the engine installation stand onto the stand formerly occupied by S-27. Booster 4, 10, and 11 remain unchanged, with the structure around the base of B-10 remaining a mystery. Just south of the inventory tank, we can see concrete poured in that area that had been prepared last week adjacent to the private lot. Up in the old Airstream trailer park behind Mega Bay, some more AstroTurf has been laid down as well as 2 lines of palm trees planted. Some ornamental plants speckle the landscape beneath the trees. This is looking like it could be a potential future hangout spot or, in proper SpaceX fashion, a party ground. We'll see how it continues to transform in future flyovers. That's it for Sanchez. Let's slide over to the build site to see if anything has changed. Now let's shift to the build site, located right next to Sanchez. Here's a labeled map of the various facilities at the site. Here we have a shot comparing the first flyover of the build site from July 26. Now sliding over to show another few seconds of the photo from July 31st to compare the changes. Starting off our tour of the build site, we look at this top-down shot where we zoom in to see Mega Bay 2's construction site on the top left. After Level 4 stacking was completed last week, the first 2 segments of Level 5 have since been lifted into position and installed by July 29th. Slightly further down sits a third segment of Level 5 of Mega Bay 2 waiting stacking. All this talk about segments and levels tends to make our head spin, so here's a nice render by Lolomatical 3D from Twitter to help visualize the changes. Moving on to the right, we notice that the flap staging area has undergone some reshuffling. The forward flaps of Ship 32 are still sitting here on the right, and Ship 29's aft flaps were put on these racks on the left. Now switching to this angled view, let's take a peek inside Mega Bay 1, responsible for production of the boosters. Work continues on Booster 12, which is currently still in 2 pieces before stacking. Now sliding left to see the high bay, home to Ship 29 and half of Ship 30. At the time of this flyover on the 31st, the nose cone and payload bay section was just about to be stacked onto its forward dome, which occurred later on the day. This marks the halfway point in the stacking of the brand new S30, with 3 out of the 6 segments stacked at the time of this writing. Next, we bank left to take a look inside the mid bay, which is currently being used to stack various test articles. On the left sits the payload bay test article S24.2. This week, it was fully stacked to reach its final height of 7 rings after it was stacked onto an additional single-axis ring. As seen in this render by the space engineer, this article will be tested in the structural test cage at Massey's, which was previously used to test nose cone 31 to failure back in March. This test article will verify the structural integrity of the payload bay with the Starlink pest dispenser and door, a necessary step if SpaceX wants to start launching Starlinks on Starship. To the right of S-24.2 sits the S-22 and E-Dome assembly, which we speculate is a mock-up for interior crew systems. Naturally, most of the changes will be made on the inside, with no notable exterior changes. Now moving back to our overhead shot, we see the ring yard, where the only notable change this week is the Booster 13's aft dome is back outside, with a tarp above likely for fog management. It was previously moved into one of the tents last week, likely to undergo preparations for stacking. And with that, we move to the final area of the build site, the Star Factory. Here's what it looked like last week. Now sliding over to this week, to help illustrate the sheer amount of work done in just 5 days. Starting off at the top of the image, roofing installation has almost been completed in this section. Moving down, we see that roofing framework erection and installation has progressed, and on the right, a vapor barrier has been installed as seen by the signature yellow color. This serves to prevent moisture from seeping into the concrete during and after the pour, which can damage and deteriorate the concrete foundations of Phase 2 of the Star Factory expansion. Moving down, you may remember from a few seconds ago that a yellow vapor barrier had been covering this area last week, signifying a concrete pour. That has since occurred, with the POW cap being poured to act as a thick base of concrete to distribute the load to the Star Factory onto its foundations. Usually we'll be heading over to the launch site, but for the first time in a while, something has happened at the satellite tracking yard, where we saw workers doing maintenance work on one of the Starlink tracking dishes. Before moving on to the launch site, make sure you give this video a like if you're enjoying it so far, and subscribe for more quality content like this. Thank you so much. And that's everything for the build site. The launch site is at the far end of Highway 4 where it meets the Gulf of Mexico. Here's a quick look at the overall layout of the launch site using this labeled map. Here we have a shot comparing the first flyover of the launch site from July 26. Now sliding over to show another few seconds of the photo from July 31st to compare the changes. We start off the launch site by checking out the orbital launch pad. Looking at the tower, it appears all cladding has finally been reinstalled to the original level it was prior to the launch on April 20th, and now only needs a fresh coat of paint. Shielding and paint work continues on the OLEM in preparation for testing Booster 9 in the coming weeks. After incurring damage during Starship's maiden flight, the inspection covers on the crowd leg above the doghouse are being reinstalled after the doghouse itself was also reinstalled last week. Following that, the area surrounding the doghouse finally received what is potentially the last pour of fondag around the OLM. Moving up, the shielding on the south-facing staircase has been painted, with the shielding on the New York staircase to the right of the crowd leg being installed to the same level as the other. No additional shielding has been spotted to suggest it will go any higher, but we'll keep an eye on it going forward. Now entering the launch ring itself, we've seen crews continue to perform checkouts and maintenance inside the OLM walkway and aft sections of B9, which explains the maze of white ventilation hoses. A portable HVAC unit is being used to supply fresh and conditioned air into the spaces to keep the employees comfortable in the scorching South Texas heat. Let's hope those hoses come down soon and we see some more testing from the booster. On the backside of the tank farm, we can see crews continue to work on painting the crowd tank shells. It appears the paintwork is nearing completion on this side. As we venture over to the front side of the orbital tank farm, we find a surprise in front of the LOX processing area. That's right, that's another pump that has shown up after the other was just removed last week. Is SpaceX playing musical pumps again? Or is this the same pump? That we don't know, but what we do know is this appears to be an additional pump instead of a replacement. If we zoom in into the row of pumps, we can see an open hole that appears to contain a vertical can or sleeve that is ready to accept the new pump. This can is identical to one just to the left of the new pump. It remains to be seen if any additional kettle boilers stored at Sanchez will make their way here or if the pump will be used as extra capacity with the existing setup. Either way, this could reduce the amount of time it takes to load LOX onto the booster during tanking operations, which is one of SpaceX's goals going forward. The pump was seen being lowered into the can later in the evening on the 31st, confirming the installation. Looking at the crowd tank shells, it appears paintwork is complete on the north-facing side. Over at the tank farm expansion area near the former suborbital landing pad, formwork is now in place around the piers that will hold future tanks and they are ready for concrete. The rebar on the right hand side is looking dense and getting closer to being ready for additional slab pours. Looking up at the tower from this angle, we can see what appears to be rehung cladding to the same level as the adjacent side, except this side appears to look a little bit better with the black paint having already been applied. It can be a little bit difficult to spot in the shade and partial coverage by the chopsticks carriage, but it's there. Just to the right of the cladding on the side of the tower facing the suborbital site, we can see the emergency egress staircase continuing to rise up to the tower. As we head up to Highway 4 towards the main entrance to the launch site, we see a new bit of SpaceX lore painted in the entryway to the pads. In the center of the painted road markings reads, Highway to Mars, followed by the iconic X of SpaceX several meters further. Will this extend all the way to the orbital launch pad? I certainly hope so. Speaking of the entrance, let's go over to some recent deliveries to the launch site. On Saturday, July 29th, we saw the Raptor installation platform enter the launch site, along with some engine shielding on top. The engine shielding appeared to be for center Raptor engines and more than just 3 of them, so it's likely the shielding was destined for B9 at the OLM. The platform has remained at the OLM next to the booster quick disconnect, or BQD hood, where it likely is being used as another access point to the maintenance platform under the OLM. Moving to the west end of the launch site over to suborbital pad B, Ship 25 remains seemingly untouched from the exterior point of view. Some work continues underneath the aft skirt, however with some signs of engine shielding work resuming. Looking up towards pad A, just on the other side of the guardrail, we can see what looks like new shielding for false ceilings above the engines. If we look from a different angle, we can see additional shielding lying besides S25 as well. However, near the top of the image is an SPMT loaded with a ship transport stand headed towards S25. An additional SPMT loaded with counterweights also traveled to the launch site on the same day. Could this be a sign of S25's return to the build site to finish engine shielding installation? Or perhaps everyone's favorite ship, S26, is ready to come out and perform a static fire after spending months in the rocket garden. Not so fast. A few road closures have come and gone since the flyover, with no visible movement of either ship. The ship lifting jig has also been attached, detached, and attached again. At this point, we're not sure what the plan is. If we shift over to the water storage tank location, we can see that crews completed the move of the remaining high-pressure gas tanks onto the concrete piers observed in the last flyover. There are 3 stacks of tanks perpendicular to the other 2 stacks, each seemingly a different size. Scaffolding can still be seen erected next to them, which crews likely used to apply a fresh coat of white paint to the stacks. The black tanks are now white, matching the rest. The different size tanks are less likely because of the different products inside and more likely a result of SpaceX thriftiness. Why buy anew what you can scoop up off the marketplace for cheap? We round up this week's episode with a look at the water retention pond. After the epic full pressure demonstration of the flame deflector plate under the OLM, it should be no surprise that the new water retention pond has collected its first batch of deluge water. In the last flyover, we observed one of the final areas near the pad that required concrete, and that was near the top of this image at the head of this retention pond. With this area now covered in concrete, we can get a better idea of how they would channel water from the pad into the pond. When we zoom into the right-hand edge of this newly poured area, we can see where a concrete ditch has been created. This ditch flows into a pipe under the concrete towards a drain grate visible above ground, then makes a hard left where it discharges into the pond. We anticipate this same style ditch may extend around the perimeter of the pad as it heads towards the tank farm, possibly with the aid of a curb or a short wall behind it. And that's it for our Starbase Flyover Update Episode 11. Thank you for choosing to fly with RGB aerial photography. If you like what you saw today, please subscribe so you don't miss out on the new videos each week, and also leave a thumbs up. Also, please consider supporting our flyovers through Patreon to gain access to our flyover gallery the same day it occurs. Finally, join our public Discord servers to discuss Starship and space in general with like-minded fans around the world. Link is in the description down below. This is Mauricio, and that's all for now.